Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host. Today, rather than discuss a specific project, my guests are a pair of industry veterans with stories to share. Let's go straight to introductions. First, J.R. Helton. You started in the film business in 1988, working as a set painter and scenic artist on such films as Lonesome Dove and Dazed and Confused. Your experience in the film industry informed your memoir, Below the Line, published in 1996. You're currently working as an author with 5 books under your belt, and you're an associate professor in the writing program at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Welcome to the other Below the Line.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Skid.
JR, glad you're here. Also with us today is Mike Taylor. Mike, you worked as a set lighting technician for more than 40 years before retiring in 2017. You started your blog, Blood, Sweat, and Tedium, Confessions of a Hollywood Juicer, in 2007, and you're still publishing today. Welcome.
Happy to be here, Skid.
To open up, what intrigues me about the discussion we're about to have is that both of you are below-the-line industry veterans who have put your film experiences on the record, and that is less common than many of our listeners might think. Just up front, JR, tell us a little bit about your book.
It's a little different, as I was a writer before I started working on movies, and I had published short story in the Missouri Review. I was a good student at University of Texas at Austin. I was getting ready to go to grad school and trying to finish up my undergraduate degree. I think I was a senior at the time. And so kind of an accident that I fell into the carnival and the movie business when Lonesome Dove came to town. And so I was still writing throughout all of that time, throughout all of those movies. I was still working on my first novel, The Jugheads, and other books and short stories and things like that. And then I was also writing about my experiences while I was working on some of these shows. So it was sort of a natural thing for me because I write memoirs or autobiographical fiction, all right, but autobiographical. And so it was really a natural kind of thing for me to end up writing about the industry itself after about, 25 movies and 8 or 9 years of working on it. And when I realized that, as I point out in the book, that I had gotten so sucked into the film industry that I wasn't really working as much of a writer anymore. I'd actually become just another carny worker, I felt. And I'd kind of lost my way in some ways, So I ended up start writing the first chapter of Below the Line.
We're going to talk more about those experiences. But first, Mike, what's your blog about?
It's just a view of life below decks in the film and TV industry. I hadn't read much. I'd seen some. Been some blogs online that I've turned on to, totally unauthorized by a woman who goes by the name of Peggy Archer, set lighting tech. The LA Times did a piece on her, and I read that and I was really impressed. Didn't really think about doing a blog, but one thing led to another, and here we are.
Well, going back to those early days for both of you, give me a sense of how you got started in the film business and, kind of, as you guys have both described it as a bit of a carnival. What made you want to join this crew?
Well, I was in college and I planned to be an environmental studies major and save the world, but I wasn't too good at science. And I was waiting in line to take a chemistry class, deciding I better do this on a really hot October day. I had a broken leg from a motorcycle wreck, so I'm on crutches. And the line went on for about an hour. And finally, a TA came out and said, well, there's too many students here. We're going to blah, blah, blah. I said, fuck it. I'd taken a film class the quarter before just on a whim. I said, screw it. I'll major in film. So I did. And then once I got out of school, what do you do with that? And after stalling for a few years, post-collegiate years, working in pizza places and delis, I hopped on a motorcycle and rode to LA and got into the business.
I'm curious, Mike, when you say you got into the business, did you know somebody already? Did you have a contact, or did you just, how did you go up and get on a movie? Because that's a question that a lot of my college students ask me.
That's the hardest step. I mean, once you break through, everything else kind of flows naturally. Right. But right. I did have a contact. One of my we didn't have any film professors at my college, but there were 2 lecturers, young guys who were passionate and really good communicators about film. One of them moved to LA. He got a job in publicity for the local PBS station. That PBS station was co-producing a 16 millimeter feature, which means lower than low budget.
Right.
And I was in LA. I'd been there for 3 months. I didn't know what to do. I was running out of money. And he said, well, call this guy. It might give you a job. They probably won't pay you. You'll get lunch and gas money. So I did. They hired me because I was no money, and I was a PA doing everything PAs do, production assistant. And after a couple of weeks, they said, "Hey, do you want to be an assistant editor?" Because they were losing people. We'll pay you $50 a week. Sure. So I left the set and joined with the editor for a while, and my first paycheck was $43.77. I remember it well. And that led to everything else. I met a gaffer on that show.
Right.
I got one of my buddies into the show when I moved up to the assistant editor. My buddy worked with that gaffer. We've all worked together for many years after that. It's just kind of like the roots of a tree. Breaking in is the hardest part. Once you get the first step and you meet some people and they realize you're for real and you're committed and you're going to work hard, it all kind of happens.
You make yourself, as I tell my students, you have to make yourself indispensable, really, in a way, on this set. You show them their value. So if you start as an intern or something like that, you do have a chance of, in many instances, I've seen someone who started for free is paid within a week or so sometimes on movie, just because they were a good hustler and they made themselves indispensable and were a good worker. It also is so true. When you talk, networking is a cliche term, but it really is what the industry is about. The film industry, in so many ways, is such a small business, and it's so much about the friends that you make and the people that you get to know. Once I got in the pipeline in Texas, I met people all throughout the film industry, right? And then you just, at some point, they start, as happened to me too, they start calling you.
Okay, another factor is just that people like to work with people they enjoy working with. People who are pleasant. They aren't assholes. They don't have attitudes. They don't have sharp elbows. You're spending long hours on set with these people. And if they're not pleasant to be around, if you're not pleasant to be around, they won't be around and you won't be around. And that's kind of how it works. It helps if you know what you're doing. But the thing is, you can learn the job. It's harder to learn to be a decent person or someone people like to be around. You kind of either have that or you don't.
JR, back to you. Similarly, how did you get started on Lonesome Dove?
I had a bigger in a way, in that, and I don't want to name too many names just because some of these people are still very much involved in the industry, but through someone that I was married to, she knew the executive producer of a big film coming to town and was friends with a big writer in Austin. And when the movie came into town, I was like, you should try to use your, she hated her job, but I was painting dorm rooms at UT and going to school. And she was able to contact, obviously, somebody above the line. She ended up getting a very low end job as an art department coordinator, which is like the secretary for the, but that was like $350 a week or something. It was at the time, it was more than she was making before. And then she told me, she said, "Hey, the head scenic artist, he said he needs a guy who can paint, but he also needs a guy who can draw. And he wants somebody who's got half a brain too." And she was like, "You sound perfect for it. You want to go talk to him?" And I was like, "Yeah, And basically, he and I hit it off. He hired me right there on the spot. And and I was hesitant, but what really convinced me is he said, "I'll pay you $900 a week and we're going to give you a hotel and per diem." Coming from the hard, really kind of hard ass world of construction that I'd been working in for years. Plus, that was what I was making a month, painting dorm rooms at UT Austin. Okay. So to suddenly get an offer for that much money, and then also to go out, and we were on the Moody Ranch, this 50,000 acre ranch, and I don't know, what was I, 25 years old, something like that, So I quit college. Just was like, screw that. And I ran off and basically joined the circus. And the movie Lonesome Dove is actually not very much, I don't say that much about it in my book. And I think that's because I had such a good time on it. My first movie was so much fun. And because of my connections that I had in it with somebody above who knew people above the line, I was able to stay on the movie all the way to the very end. In fact, also I made very good friends with Kerry White, who's a great production designer. He's one of the few people that I said really nice things about in Below the Line, because he's a genuinely nice person. And Kerry White was my patron for a long, long time on a lot of movies. And he really encouraged me. He hired me to be his on-set painter when the lead scenic left, and wanted to keep me on. And so there was that personal connection. I just immediately wanted to work on another film after that. I went ahead and traveled across the entire country and went to the DG studios, Dino De Laurentiis. It was out of Wilmington, where they make a lot of movies. Yeah. And I went out there to work on a movie called The Von Metz Incident, which ended up being called Loose Cannons, starring Gene Hackman and Dan Aykroyd. Brilliant comedy pairing there, and and it was just it was a tri-star picture, big budget, poorly received, and dumb movie. And it was on that second movie that I really saw a huge difference in what it was to work, because I was working as a local. I was putting myself up. I was eager to work on another film, and we had to punch in, in those studios. You had to punch in. It was grim. It was really Grimsville. You had to punch in at, like 6:30 in the morning, and we were working, 14-hour days, and sometimes we do 2 weeks straight and stuff like that. And we were working in these grim studios with unsafe conditions, really nasty chemicals as painters, that you're working with. And so it only took my second movie. It all kind of, my fantasies kind of, I got a dose of the real world there, what it was really like.
It's a great pair of stories, the bookends right there. It's like, it's really great. It's really fucked.
Yeah.
Mike, similarly, did you see both sides or the full picture of the industry when you were starting out, or?
Well, a little bit of both. I remember when they bumped me up to assistant editor, I was no longer on set. So I'm in the office all the time. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, the crew came back and there was a big meeting. There was a lot of tension because they were working really long hours. They weren't getting paid much at all. I mean, the gaffer was making $400 a week, which wasn't much even back then. That's a department head. And one of the grips got very emotional at this meeting, and the director, he goes, "I'm not an animal." I mean, it's like a line out of a movie. I mean, he said it with total passion. And, the director said, "Fine, I'll give you all points in the movie." We all got a point, which is totally useless or something like that, but it calmed the waters. So I saw it wasn't always sweetness and light, but I still was totally bought in. And I wasn't until I think the next movie or a couple of movies later, I finally got hired as a grip. And our first day was on a beach. And I thought, oh man, working on a beach, this is great. And it was the beach where they made the Rockford Files out at Paradise Cove. I love that show. This is going to be a great day. Well, 16 hours later, after carrying a 400-pound dolly through the sand back and forth, sunburned like a lobster, I was just beat to death. I realized this is not quite what I thought it was going to be. So we all got our lessons, but I was still into it. It took a few more years before I got more cynical.
Yeah. And I think you might, Mike, had different experience also because this was a big theme in Below the Line. I was trying to stay in Texas. After that terrible experience in Wilmington, I was determined to try to stay home and work as a local in Texas. And so I was really having to hustle. Yeah, if I could say so myself, I was a pretty good hustler. I really, I'd have the phone number of the construction coordinator, production designer. I was like calling them as they're checking into their hotel room and stuff. I was really on top of trying to get work, and I did get work. I got work all the time, and I wasn't very discriminating. I would work on, whoever paid me the most and what was usually closest to wherever I lived at the time. And I turned down A Perfect World, a Clint Eastwood movie, to do some, I think it was some Hallmark movie of the week or something. But I was, they offered me a lot more money, on the TV movie. So I, as I say in Below the Line, I saw a lot of in the beginning when I was first starting, it was mainly just an Austin crowd, a lot of people in Austin working on movies. And I would see my friends down at the unemployment. There would be long dry spells, and we would have to, and usually you would maybe only be on for a couple weeks on unemployment or something. And then sure enough, a show would come through and we would all try to jump on it as soon as we could. Now that began to change as more and more movies were being made in Texas. Okay. They started bringing more and more, and it got easier. You still had to hustle, but it did get easier to get work versus people that I know that still work in the business in Los Angeles or in Atlanta or in New York, who are in the unions, and they had the options of being day players and different things like that we just didn't have in Texas.
That's right, because you've got a couple of productions going on, but it's not a hub, or at least wasn't at the time.
Yeah, a mutual friend of Mike and mine, he does the biggest features that are made right now, but I remember when he was in LA that a lot of times he would pick up really good work for, a couple of weeks on, James Cameron's new film or something like that. It was, you can do those kinds of things if you're in New York or Los Angeles. And at the time in Austin, that wasn't an option. And I doubt that it is now even.
Yeah, day playing is actually kind of fun because you get called in. You can't have no obligations. I mean, you do a good job, but you get to see people you haven't seen for a while. You work 2 or 3 days or a week or two, and then you're done. And you don't have the long-term commitment, And in between your regular gigs, it's really kind of a nice way to go.
Another reason why people thought I was crazy when I wrote Below the Line, I became pretty much the main lead scenic of Texas. And I could say that with confidence. And, even though it wasn't very high up, obviously, I'm not trying to inflate my position in the hierarchy, obviously, right? But you know what it means to have a crew and to have responsibility. And suddenly it became less fun as well in that regard when I had, 10 guys working for me and 100 sets on a piece of crap, the third installment of Heaven and Hell, the mini series about the Civil War that they couldn't even get Patrick Swayze to do a cameo in. And with, 100 sets from the Civil War, and you're only a week ahead of the shooting crew, and just really hard grinding TV stuff, or a feature as well. A lot of times at the end there, a big key lead scenic would come in. My last 2 movies weren't even in the book. Courage Under Fire, which was a big film, Denzel Washington and Meg Ryan at the time. And then Michael, a Nora Ephron film. John Travolta was the biggest star in the country. And what would happen is the lead scenic would come into town and he would call me. And basically I would become his scenic foreman and do everything pretty much, do as much as possible of their job for them. I'd make good money. I'd get half of what they were making because they were in the union in either Chicago or New York or Los Angeles. But I didn't have any complaints really because I was being compensated well for it. My biggest complaint, again, though, was that I had to work as a local, and a lot of movies were filming in Austin and I didn't live in Austin. I had moved to a ranch about an hour and a half away from Austin for many of the movies that I worked on. So for instance, on the movie Dazed and Confused, I spent that whole movie crashed on friends' floors and people's houses, and or trying to make the 3.5-hour round trip to Austin, which that makes a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, even harder. And that's one of the things I was really particularly angry about when I wrote Below the Line. It's not a sour grapes book, but I was angry about the way I felt we were being taken advantage of by production managers who would try to argue with me over my gas receipts and being excessively petty or not rent my vehicle or, not different things like that. Was one of the reasons I wanted to get out too, is because I wasn't making as much money. When you have to put yourself up in a hotel, for weeks or a condo and, and they're not renting your vehicle and you're doing all kinds of, then it really eats into your budget.
You had reason to be angry.
Well, JR, let's then pivot and talk about the decision to write the book. It is very illuminating. I think a full picture of what people experience on film sets, the good and the bad. You were a writer before and obviously gathering these experiences. So but the decision to actually write the book.
That was kind of also accidental, fortuitous kind of thing in that I was working on a miniseries based on James Mister book called Texas. And it was produced by Aaron Spelling. And it's the movie that I go into most detail on in Below the Line towards the end of the book. And the reason I do is I wanted everybody to get a true feeling of what a disastrous production can be and how when you have poor decision making from the top to the bottom and just disorganization, and also in defense of some of the people that I was working for, they had a very short pre-production schedule as well. But I ran into an old writer friend of mine named Jan Reed, who was an editor and a great journalist with Texas Monthly. I ran into him in Brackettville, Texas, where Happy Shahan had built the Alamo for John Wayne's The Alamo, where I was working on like my third movie in this old Western town that was falling apart. And Jan knew me as a writer more than anything. And he asked me about my writing. And it just hit me like a hammer in my stomach. Because all I was doing was complaining to him about my production designer and the art director he'd hired and just all of the minutia. And I realized I'd become part of this. I wasn't really working as a writer anymore. He was cracking up, by the way. And he said, you should write that down as an article, send it to me, and maybe we'll get it published. And I'll send it to somebody at Texas Monthly. So I did. And the first chapter of Below the Line was actually an article that I wrote for Texas Monthly. They sent that, Jan, because I had this friend who was an editor there. He sent it to Evan Smith. He's still a big editor here in Texas, but he was a senior editor or something at the time. And he liked it. He liked the piece, but I believe the chief editor named Gregory Curtis, he killed it because they were about to do a Lonesome Dove issue. All right. It was the beginning of the canonization of Lonesome Dove, which, as much as I enjoyed that film and, and all that, and I'm proud of my work on it, but it really went overboard, I think, with some of the worship of that film. So they didn't want my cynical take on the business. So my friend Jan said, why don't you send it to the Austin Chronicle? And that was being edited by this guy named Lewis Black. And I'm more than happy to name him on this story. He hated it. He was furious. He wrote me back a very angry letter. He said, we don't publish this kind of crap. And as it turned out, he was really trying to push Austin. And at that time, this was, around 94, 95, after Days Confused had been made, right? And so he was really pushing guys like Richard Linklater and Rodriguez. And in other words, I felt that he was acting kind of like as a booster for the film industry as well. So he actually took personal offense. He got so mad that when I published the first edition of Low Line, he showed up and sandbagged me on some radio show that I was doing. I didn't even know he was going to be a guest on it, and started getting mad at me on air because I didn't like Pulp Fiction as much as he did when it had come out. He really took offense at my opinions on movies. So anyway, the long story short, I was so pissed off that these two magazines had both killed my story that I realized, if you think that first nice chapter was if that offended you, I've actually got a lot more to say. I have a much more to say. And I sat down and it just flowed out of me. I wrote a whole book in 6 weeks between working on movies. I had much more to say. So I have to credit those guys for shooting me down. It made me write the book.
That's good.
Mike, what drove you to start your blog in 2007?
I've been writing just for my own sake. I wrote a LA detective novel from like 1990 to 2005. It took me a long time. And so I was into writing, but, I was just doing it on my own. So I was kind of wanting to write something about the business. But what spurred me was I finally got into sitcoms, which is where the old men go when they can't do the hard work anymore. And I was doing one for NBC called Good Morning Miami. And my hometown San Francisco film critic, who was a really good writer, just a scalding thrower of lightning bolts, just ripped the hell out of it. So I sent him an email and said, man, you're torpedoing the ship that I'm riding on. You're killing me here, And we got into him back and forth. Apparently he thought I was a writer on the show. And at some point I let him know I wasn't. And he was like, oh. So when he had a chance to edit a little section of the Entertainment Sunday paper, he said, I want to have some people write pieces about the business. So why don't you write one for me? And I did, and it got in the paper. My only non-blog published piece of writing. Then he said he's going to start his own blog. So maybe I could write some more. And I wrote up 3 more. Then he changed his mind. So I had 3 posts. Figured, well, hell, I'll start a blog and I'll write 3 or 4 and that'll be it. And one thing led to another again. And once I tapped into that vein, kind of like JR said, the stuff starts flowing out. The stories start coming and it gets easier and it gets better. And now it's 13 years later. I've slowed way down. I just do 1 a month now. And I'm, trying to turn the blog into a book, basically. But that's how it started. I've
encouraged Mike for years since I discovered his blog to please turn it into a book. Whether he decides to name names or not, I don't know. I don't even know if that would necessarily matter because I think he did such a good job in his writings, his posts. I think of them as a mini essay or mini chapters for a book. I don't even think you'd have to name names. I was purposely naming names in Below the Line. And that was actually a real breakthrough for me in writing that book, because when I first started, after I wrote that first chapter as an article, every time I tried to write about the film business, I had to change so many people's names. And that was the breakthrough for me. After I wrote that article, I was like, screw it. I'm going to use it's a name game and I'm going to use everybody's real names, and I really didn't think about that at the time. I didn't think about the implications of it so much, because there's some people that, in fact, there's a couple people that were I to publish it again, I might change their names just because they come out particularly bad, but they weren't any worse than any number of other people. They just happen to be the closest people to me. I might maybe change a few of those names, but it's such a name game from the actors to everybody that you know that it's hard not to name everybody. And of course, that's what gets you, that's the difference between writing this book and not, is that's what gets you out of the business. Everybody has, the film business is famous for having great stories, but you can't tell them. It's like the movie Wag the Dog. It's a great movie, Wag the Dog, where all Dustin Hoffman, all his character wants at the end of the movie from De Niro is, I've got to be able to tell the stories of this. And they end up, killing him. They assassinate. They're like, no, because it's a deal breaker for him. He wants to be able to tell the stories about it, about what happened, So I was really purposefully trying to also name names to try to write myself out of to force myself not to take any more shows. And even after I published that first edition in '96, I still got a job. I got a job on Selena as the lead scenic. They came out to the dog ranch, Kerry White and the construction coordinator and Dave Will, and they found me on this out in the middle of nowhere and offered me, money that I needed. And I said, yeah, but then I put my second in charge and I told Kerry, I said, hey, I've got this book coming out and I feel like a total hypocrite doing this. And also it's going to piss a lot of people off. I was even selling below the line t-shirts. There's still some people who have those years later. And so there were people walking around wearing below the line t-shirts that I'd, maybe not said the nicest things about them in the book. So that, it was awkward. And I should mention too, that first edition, I had a lot of agents interested because like I said, I was a writer and I was trying to sell my novel and stuff, I was trying to sell the Jugheads and other books, but all these agents, what they wanted was below the line. They wanted this, and they wanted movie star gossip. They wanted to know who was sleeping with who was taking drugs and who was, they wanted all that, the kind of crap that you write in a tell-all, a different kind of book. And I had a lot of problems with these agents. So some friends of mine basically formed our own press. This was before, the internet was everywhere. Some of my buddies in the art department, we just put our money together and we self-published the first edition of Below the Line. And we had no idea it sold out. We sold like 1,500, 2,000. We sold all of our copies. And we had a really good distributor in the Samuel French trade, which used to distribute movie books out of Los Angeles, I believe. Yeah. And they got furious at me because they called me on the phone. They were like, is this Agarita Press? And I'm out in this, barn trailer in the country. Yeah, this is Agarita Press. Like, we need 2,000 more copies right now. And I was like, I didn't have $40 to my name. I was like, well, that's going to take a while. And so we ended up maybe getting them 1,000 more copies, but because it was distributed well, a film director named Terry Zwigoff found the book, and he had just made the movie Crumb. And then his friend, Robert Crumb, was in San Francisco visiting him. They both read Below the Line in 96, 97. And then Robert Crumb painted a cover for it. And Terry called me out of the blue and he tracked me down also. And basically those two guys are the reason that the book got republished in 2000 in a second edition from Last Gasp Books with a new Robert Crumb cover. And Robert Crumb and I became very good friends after that. And we've been writing each other letters for over 20 years. And he's painted 4 covers for my books now. But all of that came about because I didn't want to go with what these agents and these publishers wanted. I wanted to publish it the way I wanted to. And it turned out to be the right decision. Although to this day, a lot of the agents, they don't get it. They still want the movie star gossip kind of stuff. They don't want to just know about how the industry really is working.
It's notable that you do mention movie stars in the book, but It's all about their interactions with crew. You're sympathetic to the stars in many cases and what they have to go through in that, but it's really about how it affects the crew and what the crew is going through on a day-to-day basis. That's the real meat of the book.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's good because there are a couple of scenes in the book, especially around Dennis Quaid. I think one of the better sections of the book is about the movie Flesh and Bone. I say at one point, because I see the way Dennis Quaid, who's ironically my brother-in-law went to high school with him and Randy in Bel Air High School in Houston, Texas. So ironically, he's from Texas. And yet when we were filming out in West Texas, these people are like, look at those Hollywood movie stars. They're just, he's such a snob. He won't even talk to us, in this bar that we'd rented for the night, And he's doing, night shoots where he's having to run out under fake rain, under fire hoses at 3:00 in the morning with, freezing cold weather. And, but they're mad at him because he's not stopping to chat with them. Or as I said, in some instances, a star can be incredibly inconvenienced, if they do stop to talk and people want, even more from them, As I said in Below the Line, to me, the only solution was to avoid people at all costs. If I was an actor, stay away from them.
Mike, I want to turn back to you and talk about the blog for a minute. I haven't read all of the posts. As you said, you've been blogging for some time now, but I have noticed that I don't get a lot of names or specific projects on the ones I've read.
I made the mistake, maybe it was a mistake, I don't know, putting my name on the blog right from the beginning. So I had to be careful what I said. And as I put in the very introductory post, I really wasn't interested, just as JR was talking about, I didn't want to be telling trash tales, tabloid bullshit. It doesn't interest me, and I didn't want to disseminate that stuff. I just wanted to tell the stories of life below decks and how it really is, the humor and the pain and everything and the bonding that goes on. Because when people suffer together like that, as both you guys know, it forms tight bonds in a hurry. Sort of similar to what military guys go through, only, without the killing, for the most part.
For the most part.
Well, we've all seen death on set,
Yeah, well,
I know you have JR, and so have I, and it's not good.
Below the Line, our producer Mark Rosenberg, tragically, he was dying right in front of us. Unfortunately, he was a very heavy set fellow, and he was choking on his breakfast, basically at the breakfast wagon there. This was in the middle of nowhere in West Texas, and he ended up having a heart attack or passing away on the way to hospital in the ambulance. And then they stopped shooting. I remember the second AD, Marge, came by and she said, Mark Rosenberg just died. Steve Klovis and Mac Brown were obviously both friends with Rosenberg.
Steve, the director of that movie. Steve
Klovis was the director, yeah. And Philippe Rousseau was the DP, who was a really great DP that I had a really good time working for him, a total professional. I had a lot of fun on that movie because I was the standby painter also, and I was right close to the triumvirate around the camera, and I just really enjoyed working with those individuals. Steve was a very nice director too. Anyway, but they said Steve can't go on today, obviously, and then I have a scene in my book, which is true, where my friend and I talk, and I say, "What do you think?" Because he had worked on a lot more movies than me, and I say, "What do you think's going to happen?" Our producer just, he said, "Oh, we'll be back to work tomorrow. They'll give us half a day off today, and then we'll go back to work." And they'll say something like, "This is what Mark would have really wanted." And it probably would have been. And I was like, yeah, but half a day? We're going to just take off half a day when somebody dies, And my friend Scott was like, hey, how long do you think they'd take off if you died on the set? Or if an electrician died, And I said, yeah, they'd probably say, get that dead grip out of here, and let's get the shot up. And we did go back to work the next day. I get it. You've got that much money on the line every day. What are you going to do?
Built a machine to make this thing, and do you stop it dead for 3 weeks? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a juggernaut. And, we were trying to finish up shooting before Christmas as well. I remember the frustration that Mac Brown had trying to just finish this film. And I have a scene where I think some of the grips, somebody was complaining about a third meal penalty or something like that. And I remember watching him really he just had it. His friend and producer died. In my opinion, he'd been very generous with the crew. He'd, hauled guys' motorcycles around out to West Texas so they could drive them around. And, when they weren't working and here's, right at the very end, people are bitching about a meal penalty or something. So I tried to show, even though I definitely complain about UPMs and line producers and things like in the book, I tried to show as much as I could from different perspectives.
Well, I'm curious for both of you what the consequences have been for breaking the cone of silence. JR, I guess the question to you is, did publishing the book manage to actually get you out of the industry? Although you said you actually did a couple of films still.
I failed completely. Well, it got me out as far as working in the film business in Austin. If I went to, there was a time though, a few years later, where when it came out in the second edition, there was a whole new group of younger people that had come into. And I had a friend tell me, she said, I don't know if I'd want to come back, right? You could probably fill a pretty good sized room with people who want to kick your ass right now. And a lot of it was for different reasons. There were people I didn't even know, or there were people mad at me, ironically later, because I didn't put them in the book, or because I had one carpenter who was upset with me because he was like, well, I worked on that movie and I didn't remember it that way. And I was like, well, tell him to write his own book. This is my personal deal, and so it worked in that respect, and then it forced me to go back to graduate school, finish my degree. Although ironically, I finished my undergrad degree and I was so broke, I went back and worked on movies for several more years. But after I wrote that, like I said, I left out the last two movies, and I was using the money from that to get back into grad school. I got my MFA and to become a college professor, which was closer to being a writer. But it didn't really. I even got a promotion really because Wygoff offered me a job as when he was making Ghost World because we become friends. And, when the director of the film and I are talking to each other constantly, as he's making the movie, and he had his production designer, he called me and said, I can get you a job as the head scenic, maybe assistant art director, give you a title. Cause I was like, I don't want to just be a scenic again if I'm going to do this. So it actually would have been a promotion to assistant art director, but I got nauseous just talking to him on the phone. He's a super nice guy, but just thinking about going back into all of that, just from the way he was talking, I knew, because I know what it means to be a professional and what it takes of you to actually really to do your job, and I considered myself one, and I suddenly got just this wave of nausea, like, oh, wow, if I accept this, I got to go out to LA. I got to jump back on this train. And so I said no. And I remember Robert Crumb wrote me a letter, and he said, Helton, you were very, very wise to turn down that job on Terry Wygoff's film. It was a very smart move on your part, and you need to keep writing. Robert really became a true sort of second mentor to me and really helped me a lot when he came along in my life. He was the first writer that I'd met, first artist that I'd met that I could really respect. Publishing that book and then republishing helped me become a writer even more. So although I did continue to try to work above the line, I foolishly wrote some screenplays for free. I was flown out to LA even back in 2006 and got and they put me up in the hotel on Sunset Boulevard. And, I met some producers, and these were all real people. This was serious. This couldn't be a movie. But I hadn't been paid yet, and the director and I were already arguing about the script, and he hadn't even finished it. And in 2006, I was pretty much like, all right, I'm going to quit trying to. Let me put it this way. I was like, I'm never going to write another free screenplay again.
That's a wise decision.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. So that's when I really stopped doing that and just concentrated on my books.
Mike, have you gotten a lot of attention at the blog? I mean, have there been consequences for you, even if you're not using names, that folks know it's you and maybe they recognize themselves?
Not really. I mean, because when I was ripping something, a show or people, I made sure that I didn't identify anyone. And just kind of trying to tell stories that everyone could relate to, everyone on the crew could relate to. But basically, I don't think a lot of people in our industry read. I mean, very few people that I worked with even knew about the blog. And once a still photographer came up and said, "Are you Mike Taylor? You're the Hollywood Juicer?" And I was like, yeah, he was a fan. I was kind of shocked at that. The rest of the crew stood around looking like, what are you talking about? They just, they have other things to do in life, and they weren't on the internet. They weren't paying attention. So it really has had no effect at all on me.
I can tell you a quick celebrity story related to my book. The actress Sandra Bullock moved to Texas. I don't know if she still lives in Texas, but a while back she lived in Texas. And not long after, I think the first edition of Below the Line came out, and one of my old scenic seconds or something was the on-set painter of this film that she was in. I don't know I can't even remember what it was called. I think it might have been Hope Floats or something. I don't know. And she turned around to him and she said, "Hey, you're not going to write a book about me or anything like that. That other painter did." She didn't know my name, I don't think. Like, "You're not going to write a book about me like that other painter did." It was like, no, I don't even know that guy.
The cover that Crumb did for you for your second edition of Below the Line perfectly encapsulates everything that goes into working on set. I mean, I've never seen a better picture.
Thanks, man. I have to agree. That's when the first letter I wrote to him, I was like, man, you totally captured the way I was feeling. That's exactly even what the people looked like that were berating me and trying to humiliate me and crush me on that film. And the hot sun beating down on, in this cheesy Western town. I mean, he definitely captured it.
Well, to put a question to both of you, over this time, what's changed in the film industry, or what stayed the same?
A lot of technology's changed, especially, I mean, I was in lighting, and now LED lighting is coming in a huge way. It was just starting to come in when I retired. I worked with a few of those lights. On the back had a screen and a menu and buttons to push, which is like baffling to me. Old dog, new tricks, and it's gone much further since I retired. And from what I hear from our mutual friend who works on big movies, if anything, it seems to have gotten worse in some ways. I mean, the chaos and the plan, the organization just seems like it's gone out the window. People make split-second decisions after armies of people have already done days of work to get ready, and they go, "No, let's go do that now," and everybody gets shoved up against it. So, I mean, there's always been a certain amount of that in the film business. You're always reacting to circumstances on the ground, things that change, people dying, whatever. But I think in that way, it's probably gotten worse.
You're right. That's always been a part of it. That was one of my complaints in Below the Line as well. Directors making or designers making split second, without any thought of the consequence of all of the people, everything that's going to entail. But I would say that things are just as bad as far as the industry exploiting local labor in so-called states like Texas, which is a very anti-worker state. It calls itself a right to work state, this Orwellian euphemism, which really means anti-union. And that's why they all were coming to Texas, is because they could get us at half price and they could make money. It wasn't just the locations, in many instances, it wasn't at all. That's why they were going to Louisiana. And of course, Louisiana famously, they cut the tax. They were so eager to cut taxes for their movie industry, they ended up losing money. From what I remember reading from all the movies that flocked to Louisiana, because I remember people doing a lot of shows in Louisiana. And then New Mexico, they went for labor there. And now, of course, Atlanta is a gigantic hub. I know that people are working there as locals as well. I should say, though, that in Texas, I was part of a union. It was already there. In fact, I said some bad things about it in the book, and I feel bad about it because what I didn't put in the book is that I eventually joined that union, Local 484, I believe it was. And it was one of the best things I'd ever done. It was the first time I'd ever had healthcare in my life. They took some money, a very little small amount of money on my check to start a pension, which God knows I wish I'd hung on to that little bit of pension that I had there. And I brought a lot of my anti-union or scared of union friends. I brought a lot of them into the union with me. All right. And in Texas, we had to be smart about it because we knew the reason they were here was because they were getting cheaper labor. I believe what they ended up doing is try to create a kind of sliding scale. So if it was a big budget thing, like I worked on horrifically bad movie, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective 2, again, horrible film, but I made great money on it. And we had a sliding scale, so like a movie like that, we would hope that they would give us a decent wage and not exploit us to it. But if it was a lower budget independent film, right, and we knew that this was some smaller director who was really, then people would not try to get as much money as if we would if it was a Malpauso, Clint Eastwood film coming to town or something like that. But I would argue that that's still a primary directive of any film. Is to make a profit. The old quote from it's attributed to Lily Tomlin. That it's called show business. They don't call it show art. It's a business. That's another thing that I was disillusioned about in Below the Line, and I talk about, which I think a lot of people end up going into the industry because they maybe want to make films themselves. I know I've met a lot of people that wanted to maybe be a director themselves, or they wanted to write movies, or they wanted to be an actor, and while they were trying to pursue those dreams, they ended up working as assistant in props and making pretty good money, and then becoming a prop master and getting married and having kids. And then you're part of the business then, and you never did become a screenwriter. You never did become a director or an actor or a stunt person. You ended up at that level. A lot of times that level where you went in, and that was one of the reasons that scared the crap out of me too, is I would look at older scenic artists and I was like, I don't want to be that guy. And then I would look at production designers that I admired too. And I was like, well, yeah, I could maybe be that guy. But if so, I would have to care about the movie in a way that I maybe don't have to care about as much at my lower level. But as I say in the book, I realized at one point is that who's pretending more? Who's telling the bigger lie? The production designer who's buying polo ponies and pretending that he enjoys working on Heaven and Hell, that he actually believes in the script, or me pretending to give a shit that I have to paint 40 styrofoam tombstones for the graveyard scene. And as I said in the book, the more important question is which lie pays more. It's probably better to do the job where to be the designer and pretend to like the script. It was an illuminating moment for me to just try to realize, okay, do I want to stay in this and try to rise up? But also I could see that, this isn't a fun, creative endeavor where we're all just contributing our creative idea. This is being run like a rigid military hierarchical system, which, as I say in Below the Line, it has to be. You have to have a hierarchical system to throw 75 strangers together to launch this gigantic leaking ship that is any movie. I mean, if you didn't have a hierarchy, it would be difficult to get any movie made. So that, I think that's something that it's like, if you want to be in the artistic creative end, then go ahead and become a director. Nowadays, I think that it's better, the industry, as far as the creative end, and that because of technology, if you do want to direct or write, you can just do it. You can actually just go ahead and do those things now. Whereas in the past, you had to raise thousands of dollars just to get the film together to shoot it. Maybe there's a positive on the creative end that's changed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the digital technology, like in that sense, it's liberated people, Right. Now, whether they're going to make any money off it or all that, I mean, who knows? But
who knows?
Make a living. Right. Sooner or later, we do have to make a living. But you're right. And the whole thing about once you get in, moving up is tough because you want to jump up, you got to leave that comfortable slot behind. You were able to pay your rent or your mortgage or pay for your kids' school or whatever. And to take that leap of faith and say, well, now I'm going to go become a DP or something and work 1 day a month instead of 8, 9, 10 days a month, it's pretty scary.
Right. And there's, as I say in Below the Line, there's always somebody there to replace you too. There's always somebody right there in the pipeline. If you don't, and I talk about that in the book, that there's an inherent insecurity that you see in throughout the entire film industry. And you can talk to actors about this, directors, but it's always a sort of, what have you done for me lately? Or what have you done lately kind of thing. And I think it's in the inherent nature of the business that you're constantly being fired. You lose your job after every show. And also there's a lot of insecurity there. So I know people that still worry, even though they have worked on so many movies for so many years. And yet once that show is shutting down, they're like, should I leave 2 weeks early and jump on this other one? But I don't want to leave my guy here in trouble. Yeah. I've got to make sure I leave a best boy or somebody who can finish this out for me. And then as an actor, I'm positive that actors are often extremely insecure people. Well, a lot of times they're insecure. So they've got it even worse. And I would think, like what happens if once your movie you work so hard on and you took a chance on and you expose yourself and yet it's a flop and the critics don't like it, doesn't make any money. Are you going to get another job? So there's this built-in inherent insecurity, both above the line, I would argue, and below the line in the industry that makes it difficult, that makes it a difficult business.
Some people would say that industry is based on creativity, and that's true to a certain extent, but it's also based on fear. Exactly what you say, because everybody's replaceable and every job is temporary. And especially for actors. I mean, I wrote a post on that called The Hardest Job on Set, which is about actors, precisely because of that. It's all hard. Our work is all hard. We've all done the work, our various jobs, and it's all hard. But at least if you did your job, you're okay. Actors, you're out there with 30, 40, 50, 60 people watching you and the cameras and the lights. In that moment, you better be good. And if you're not, you may not work again.
I make fun of some actor. He passed away, I think, Robert Urich or something. I make fun of him in one terrible TV movie he was working on. And I was trapped inside of a set while he was shooting some scenes and he's flirting with the makeup girls or something. But I watched him do a couple of takes and it was just so cheesy. It was just, as he limped out the door and said, hey, I'm okay to his kids or whatever. And I was like, maybe this acting thing isn't that difficult, when you see some of the cheesy, one take work. But then when you see, I remember watching Robert Duvall, I'm a huge fan of his, and remember watching him on the set of Lonesome Dove and just really seeing why he's such a great actor. He would do, 3 takes and, that was enough. You could just tell that he knew more about it, I guess, maybe than the director did sometimes, But they really put themselves out there in a way that, a lot of people think they can be actors, but there's this special quality, certain thing that they have. I talk about it in Below the Line. I have a guy who says that actors are really somewhat insane, and the only time that they're really sane is when they're acting, when they're in front of the camera, when they're pretending. That's when they're most comfortable and being normal, versus when they're not in front of a camera.
Well, they do have a way of focusing their energy on one thing in that moment. I mean, like if you're just talking to an actor in between takes or offset, they have a way of focusing on you, and you kind of feel like you're the only person in the world. Spotlight shining on you. And I think they bring that to the camera, and that's a special thing. I mean, I don't know how they do that. I really don't.
That's a great manipulative personality tool as well that anybody can use in the film industry. Yeah. You're so important. Your opinion is just so important to me. And you're so right. You're so right about all these things. I talk about ass kissing as an art form in Below the Line as well. And I say that, if I say so myself, I was pretty good at it. I really learned how to kiss ass and kiss ass well. It's such a personality-driven business that in some instances it was easy. It was just basically some guy knew I was a writer and he wanted to be a writer. So all I had to do is be interested in his stories that he told me about wanting to be a writer, even though I didn't believe he was ever going to be a writer in his life. But I would sure act, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, yeah, you should write that down. You should really do, and I didn't mean any of that, but I did get a lot of work with that individual. I mean, there's a certain amount of that, which I make fun of it in terms of the movie Catch-22, that one of my favorite films, Catch-22, where they say to Yossarian, Buck Henry says to him at one point, they say, we just want you to like us. Yeah. And it's like the worst thing that they could really ask him, and that's, I say that in Below, like, it's not enough that I'm doing my job and all this. I got to be your friend too off the set, or, do I really have to laugh at your jokes also, and that was another problem that I had with the industry. It's like, that sort of phony aspect, which could drive you nuts.
It was also important to find a crew that you could work with where you actually liked everybody,
right,
and where they told funny jokes and where you didn't have to do as much of that as you say, because you're right. That's a problem.
I agree completely. And I was painting a more negative picture in Below the Line, and I still have friends in the industry, and I met a lot of really nice people. That wasn't even, you didn't have to do any of that kind of crap. The movie Flesh and Bone, the chapter about that's more indicative actually of a lot of my experiences. I had a lot of friends working in the business. That was one of the reasons I think I got so much work, is I could hustle, and I did have a lot of contacts, and I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of people that I did enjoy working with. I hung around with them after work. We'd all go get drunk or whatever, and if we got off early enough on a Saturday night.
Well, let me put to both of you whether or not it's possible that by illuminating some of these situations of what goes on set and capturing it in print, whether that itself can lead to some change to make things better, or are we just capturing it and that's the way things are always going to be?
That's a good question, Mike.
I don't think anything I've written is going to change anything. About the only thing I really tried to do was let the newbies know, the people who are interested in getting the business, what they were getting into. Not try to be too negative, but tell them, look, it's really, really hard. You have to really, really want it. You have to push harder than you maybe have ever pushed before, so that it can be worth it. Of course, then years later, your body gets hammered. It takes a toll, and you're gonna pay a price for that. And I just tried to be honest with them.
I would answer that question by saying that I wasn't trying to change anything. I write for very personal reasons. When I write a book, I try to go through something and then learn something in the process of, trying not to sound too pretentious here, but learn something in that process of discovery and going through it on the page as I write it, but also trying to maintain basic conventional narrative elements. In other words, to try to tell a story and keep it moving and keep it interesting. So in writing Below the Line, I was just trying to go through my own disillusionment, really, with seeing the man behind the curtain and being disappointed with myself, really, in a way, and that I love movies. And yet I realized at the end of the book that this is basically just a business like any other business. When I wrote my book, Drugs, I was going through my experiences with drugs. And I was trying, hopefully by the end of that book, when the reader reads it, they'll feel whatever I discovered, the changes that I went through. The same thing with the Jughead, same thing with my latest book, Bad Jobs and Poor Decisions. It's just me talking about my 20s, you know? And so it's always really personal with me. That said, I just got the rights back to Below the Line. I'm not really sure what to do with it because I've had many young people tell me, total strangers contact me as well and say, this book should be required reading in freshman film classes because it just really shows you what it's like, you know, to be on set. And I've had people that work in the business write me an email out of the blue and say, God, I wish I'd read this before I worked on the last, 15 shows. I don't know. Maybe I'll try to get it back out there again. I'm always thinking about my next book. So I'm trying to finish 2 other books right now that I've been working on for years. So I haven't thought about, I looked at Below the Line again to talk with you, Skid. and I did a lecture for a film studies course for UTSA where I teach the other day. But that's the first time I'd looked at Below the Line in years. And it still made me laugh at least. So that's a good sign. To me, that's always a good sign. If you can go back into something that makes you, if you don't feel ashamed of it, if you still think it's funny or interesting, then you've succeeded, whether you sold any copies or not.
Well, I'm one who agrees. I think it should be required reading in film schools. I mean, I picked up a copy, I think it was last year. I have a couple copies just to find a line. I remember the line, and I read the line, and then I read the whole book again because I couldn't stop because it's that good a story, that good a narrative. I mean, it's terrific. It's really good. And there's a lot of truth in there too.
Well, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. That means a lot.
Well, and again, I enjoyed the book. I think, as Mike says, there's a lot of truth, a lot of insight, and there's also a lot of laughs. It's a fun read all the way through, JR. JR, if people want to find the book, you said the rights are back to you. It's still out there, though, right? Where can people go to find it?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
your other writing.
I'm a horrible business person. So on my website for all of my books, I just put, whoever does it for me, I just put a link to Amazon, so I don't want to plug Amazon. So you can go to any other independent seller and probably find it as well. But there's copies still circulating out there. And then all my other books had big, Random House distributes the Jughead and Drugs, and W.W. Norton published Bad Jobs and Poor Decisions a couple of years ago.
Well, what is your website, JR?
jrhelton.com. I have links to my books on there. So if people are interested, that'd be great.
Mike, we're both encouraging you to bring your blog posts into a book yourself. It's a lot of good stuff there as well. Until that happens, where can people go to follow the blog?
Google Hollywood Juicer or Blood, Sweat, and Tedium will take you there. But I think the website is hollywoodjuicer.blogspot.com. Personally, I recommend people, if they go, the older stuff is better. That's what I'm going to base the book on. And you can find some of that. If you go to the website, you see a picture of these tattered, battered gloves. And underneath that, it says, new to this site, click here and scroll down. That'll take you to a post that has what I once assembled as sort of the greatest hits. I haven't updated that in years, but if you don't like any of those, then don't even go further. But that's a pretty good introduction to the blog. 700 posts to choose
and people
from,
will like it.
Well, for people in the industry, they'll see themselves in the writing. For people who are interested in the industry, it's worth checking out. Guys, thanks for being here today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Skid.
Yeah, thanks, Skid. Good to see you, JR. Take care, brother.
You too, man.
Listeners, thanks for being you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and why not rate us wherever you get your podcasts? It helps us reach new listeners. New listeners, it's easy to peruse all of our back episodes at the website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. All episodes of the podcast are also listed on IMDb, so it's easy to cross-reference the film credits of my guests. If you've got questions or comments, you can send email to skid, S-K-I-D, at belowtheline.biz. If you're on Facebook, you can find photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. And finally, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Be safe and join us again next week on Below the Line.